Test, test. Okay. Test. Test, test.
Can you flip it to the other side? You're awesome, but you're in.
Okay. Well, I put it here, and it didn't seem to. How's that? Here.
Better.
It can't hear.
You can't hear it as well?
No.
Okay, can we pop it off, turn it off real quick? Just so they can't hear me.
Test, 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 test. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And you're ready to stay live? Or?
Yeah.
We're going to get started in 1 minute. Okay, we're going to get started. We've got one more candidate coming to this.
We're just waiting for one more candidate to come to the stage.
Okay. I'm going to ask for your silence and cooperation and ask for Tiffany Joseph in this gathering for us. Thank you.
Eithas go éile ACM, Scholaswit and a snet, Eithas in a faa, Nil the Tungocht and a Chilanganat la, Jits into Hujasasp, 8 lungs, Aquachin 8 lungs, Stout 8 lungs, Husaicum 8 lungs. Good evening, everyone. I'm here to acknowledge the territory of my ancestors, the Saanich people. I said Saanich-Gulf means this place that we are on right now is a place that I belong. Guests in our territory would say Chisela. Chisela means you're here. But this is not the place of the descendants of Slamuk. I acknowledge the 4 villages where we still reside. Huchasas, which is Sartla First Nation, Saot, which is Saot First Nation, and Akwachin, which is Pakwachin First Nation, and Husaikum First Nation. So the airport is on Husaikum, the village of Husaikum. And this place we are in right now is Satinas. Satinas means chest sticking out. So our place names may sound peculiar to English-speaking people, but we recognize the territories, the islands, the bodies of water, the way the rocks stick out and the mountains stick out from the lands. They are a relative. All of the trees, all of the animals, we recognize them as relatives of ours. And the culture and the way of seeing the world that our culture creates is one to see that we are all related. So for a long time when people have done territory acknowledgements, this might be new to some people in the room, but territory acknowledgements have been happening for my whole life in Vancouver and Victoria. And it would have been my uncles and it would have been granduncles who were doing territory acknowledgements. It's actually newer for people to see women doing this work. I have a friend from Lekwungen, her name is Brianna Dick. She recently got married, so she's Brianna Bear actually. And she's been doing territory acknowledgements in Lekwungen, and she was told by her grandfather that it was important for her to do that work. He brought her everywhere he'd went and showed her that work. So the thing is when all those men were doing the territory acknowledgements, they started out calling them welcomings. They said, can you welcome people to your territory? They had to do it that way because people couldn't feel comfortable acknowledging that the territory was the indigenous lands, is the indigenous lands. So they had to make people feel comfortable and say, can you welcome them, please? And so they said, welcome to Saanich territory, welcome to Squamish territory, welcome to Lekwungen territory, so that people could even see us and that we exist. We've been here since the arrival of settlers, and we've been here obviously before. And we've been taking care of the land this entire time, even when our land was being stolen. We are in an era of truth and reconciliation, but very often people will say, this is the era of reconciliation, but where's the truth? How much truth is being told? How much history is told, including the indigenous experience? People are familiar with the Orange Shirt Day that happened recently, I hope. Orange Shirt Day was to acknowledge the experience of a residential school survivor. There are plenty of resources now available where you can go on YouTube and hear the story of a residential school survivor and literally being tortured, malnourished, being used for science, starved. They did this to children and they tortured them. It's important to know that truth. It's important that people know what preceded you. Very often when people hear the stories of indigenous people, they want to say, "This, I didn't do that. I'm not responsible for that." That's fair, and I hope you would want to treat people literally without torturing them and literally seeing people as human beings. The people who have had power since the beginning of the creation of Canada have been people who've condoned torture of Indigenous children. There could be not just starvation, not just electrocution, but literally having children from here to across the street, away from their home, 6 days a week, and told, you can't see your family being across the room from a brother or sister and being told and punished for even ever speaking to them, talking to them. You couldn't even touch your own brother or sister in a residential school. You'd be punished. So when I acknowledge territory, it's really important to acknowledge the history. And I'm not going to do it the same way that my uncles did, and I'm not going to do it the same way my granduncles would have, because we need to move forward. It's not about making people feel comfortable anymore. It's about people actually healing. We are doing so much to heal our people. We do so much. We've done it through our culture. We're trying to reclaim our foods. We're doing all this work, and it's important for settlers of this territory to do that work as well. It's important to know that history so that it's not repeated. It's important to know that history so that you recognize the root beliefs behind them. The root belief is that Indigenous people, as created by the Canadian government, were never seen as human beings. And once finally seen as human beings, were seen as children, children of the state. And it's also important for people in these territories to recognize that our oral history of the Douglas Treaty was never to give up land. And any lands that were occupied by settlers were meant to have essentially a rent paid. We also, to basically greet settlers to our territory, were stopping them from setting fire to a forest in Cordova Bay. It's important to understand how people arrived here. They arrived here with many diseases of their bodies and their minds. And what our people were trying to do was negotiate with them and say, hey, this is a way you respect people when you come to their territory. When you come to a territory, you don't set fire to a forest. When you come to a territory, you don't drain a wetland. When you come to a territory, you respect that place and you respect the people. I think now people probably have an understanding of how that's important, but the first people who came here didn't. And it's really important to understand that. Really important to understand how much education we've been giving to settlers of these territories whilst much of our power was being taken away. That power was taken away through the banning of our reef nets. When people first came here and arrived here in our territories, you could find salmon as big as me. You could find trees as big as this room. One of the first things that they would do was log the entire place when they'd arrived to a place. I think everyone who lives here enjoys that there's so much forest available, parks to hike in and go for walks in. But those are there because they were protected, but that's not how the whole land was treated. The banning of our reef nets meant that they didn't want competition from Indigenous people. So when we are not succeeding economically, it's because there was laws put in place to stop us from being economically successful. They banned our reef nets so we couldn't fish, and they also made it illegal for anyone to accept, to buy fish off of our people. So if you've been here for generations, if your family's been here for generations, your family probably did have a relationship with our people. But then the law came in and said, you cannot have a relationship with the Indigenous people. So this law, these laws, prevented us all from connecting, prevented us all from being successful and be able to be in good relationship with one another. And therefore, we must do so much work to repair that damage caused and repair the relationship between Indigenous peoples, the Saanich people here specifically, and the people who've settled here. I do restoration work, and I do a lot of education. I do my best to help people understand that the people here have always cared about women, have always cared about children, have been able to fish, hunt, and harvest in a way that you could walk through our territories and have hundreds of butterflies, bees, different pollinators. You could be walking through a field and it'd be a buzz. The way we took care of the land was so full of life. And that's the way we've always taken care of land and taken care of family. And I think the people who came here had hoped to be able to accomplish the same thing. And I think many people who came here had hoped that they could reclaim that from being a damage that happened to them in Europe. So I share that because the truth can help us all heal. The truth can help us see, I did have a longing. I have had a longing for a healthy and abundant life. And if I can actually learn from the local Indigenous people here, it actually is much more possible. I'll finish with talking about climate change and climate emergency. Many municipalities and cities have declared climate emergency, and I feel it's very important that many people will be talking about that today, that my people have emphasized that having Saanich-Gulf, good thoughts and feelings, when dealing with emergencies with a clear mind, being grounded and not in a panic. So, Haishka Hela, Haishka Kwanzanela Letnam.
Okay. Thank you for opening this gathering. Thank you to all of you who have stepped up to, in the hopes of representing us, and thank you, Elizabeth, for representing us these last two terms. My name is Anne-Marie Daniel. I am a partner in a leadership development consultancy in North Saanich called the Roy Group. My background is as a mediator. But I have to tell you, full disclosure, this is my first debate. So normally I allow discussions to go on until they reach some productivity and clarity, which I'm hoping is going to happen tonight. However, I have the invaluable assistance of Robin and Ellen here in the front to help me with timekeeping so that we respect your time and keep this moving along so that we can get to your questions as well. I want to go through what we're going to do tonight. We're going to, in a moment, give the candidates 1 minute each to tell you about themselves. We're then going to spend a few minutes looking at some yes or no questions. Voters are forced to make a decision, yes or no. There's no gray zone. And so we have 100debates.ca has offered up some questions, and then all the 100debates.ca events around here, the thinkers got together, looked at some other questions, and a lot of them seem to be a yes or no type question. So we put those together in the beginning so you can see where the candidates stand. If they don't have a yes or a no answer, they will simply not answer. Then we're going to get into the 4 debate questions that are being used at all debates across Canada. And we'll explain more how that's going to work. But basically all candidates will have a chance to respond, and then we'll see if we can have a quick discussion once they've all had their... Sure.
I see a number of empty seats, and I see a lot of people back there. Would it be appropriate this time to say, if you have an empty seat here, you put your hand up so people who are at the back can find the seat and sit?
Great. Nope, that's just great. So we're going to take a 10-minute break in the middle of this session. We'll be out of here at 9. And after the second round of 2 questions developed by 100debates.ca, we're going to have questions from the audience. There should be a question sheet roving around, and the questions from the audience will then be picked based on whether they've been asked so far in the evening. We'll give the candidates 1 minute for closing statements, and then you'll be out of here by 9. How is the sound? Is anyone having trouble hearing me? Excellent. Well, that's a good start. Thank you all for coming out and for you know, hearing what our candidates have to say. We have some very important decisions ahead of us and some very important actions to take over the next few years. And so this debate is specifically focused on the environment. Is there one before that? Okay, here are the protocols and format. I'm just asking for a general, let's all respect each other. And that, so, you know, everyone here is choosing to lead and choosing to serve their community. Let's all be thankful for that. We're all neighbors here, quite literally, so please just say hello to the person beside you and know that we're all having good intentions in this. Thank you. Okay. The other thing is to respect time limits, of course. And so the same will be, in order to respect your time and get you out of here at 9, I hope you will give me the permission, I'm assuming you do, to move this discussion along, this debate along. So respecting each other, respecting time limits, and the last thing I would ask of the candidates is respecting the questions that are asked. While I know this is politics, I would ask you to avoid spin as much as possible. We have the benefit of, and while I do respect that you have messages that you want to get out there, just to try to keep those messages on to the question. There's a screen up here. There's one at the back of the room for the benefit of the candidates. And that's about it. We're going to head into the round 1 of the forced choice questions. Oh, but we are going to do introductions first. See, we're all working together already. Excellent. Okay, and in order to make this all very fair, we have some colored beads, and you get to be the person who chooses who gets to start. Oh, and it's our acting MP, the Green Party, Elizabeth May. So Elizabeth, you've got a minute to tell us about yourself. And your timekeepers, Robin and Ellen, will give you a 15-second warning when you...
I brought my little clock from Parliament.
Thank you.
Questions and questions three have to be asked in 30 seconds, so I'm kind of used to it. I'm honored to be here on unceded territory. I appreciate the territorial acknowledgement and detail that we went through to recognize that as separate culture Canadians, we have the bulk of the work to achieve justice, truth, and reconciliation. I want to tell you, a lot of you know a lot about me. On this topic, I've been active on the work around climate change since 1986, not because I sought it out as an activist. I have been working on many environmental issues all my life and was recruited into the Minister of Environment's office at that point. I learned climate science from Environment Canada scientists. I've been working on the issue ever since. And in my view, there is nothing as pressing in this election as facing the climate emergency. I believe that this is a referendum on climate that we're holding on October 21st, and we have to respond with the appropriate level of seriousness and purpose.
Thank you. Okay, now it's going to go clockwise. It's over to you, Jan.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and thanks to all who came here today, my colleagues on stage, and thanks to Tiffany Heischka for the territorial acknowledgement. Of course, this is Saanich territory. I'm Ryan Windsor. I'm your Liberal candidate for Saanich and the Gulf Islands. For the last 5 years, I have served very happily and glad to have been the mayor of Central Saanich. I live there with my wife and 2 young children. And for me, this election is above all about fairness. Whenever I'm serving my community as an elected official locally or as a volunteer, I'm always asking how are we being fair to each other, how are we helping each other. And whether it's a big issue like the climate emergency and protecting our oceans, or local issues like how you feel secure in your own home with affordable housing, or how you're getting around the capital region with public transit, I actually believe there's a lot at stake in this election. It's why I'm asking to earn your vote in the upcoming election on October the 21st, so that we can get down to helping people at the local level address the needs they have. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one on each side of the stage.
Good evening. My name is David Bush. I grew up in Northern Ontario, hiking, swimming, hunting, fishing, and backcountry camping. Something I hope to share with my kids and someday my grandkids. I hold 2 Bachelor of Science degrees, one in biochemistry and a second in nursing. I've worked as a critical care nurse in 2 different hospitals, and I've taught for 2 different universities in both the chemistry and the nursing departments. For the last decade, I've been working as a lawyer, both defending people's rights in courts, as well as advising governments and various boards. I'm running because of my 2 kids. I'm terribly concerned about the way this country is going. We have 45% of Canadians have less than $200 left over in their pockets at the end of the month. Between the economy problems we're facing, the problems with affordable housing and affordable rent, and the problems affecting the environment, those are the reasons why I'm running.
Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much for coming out. Thank you, Tiffany. My name is Sabina Singh. I am the NDP candidate for Saanich-Gulf Islands. I am a PhD in political science. I taught for 15 years throughout the province of British Columbia, and in 2008 I came to teach at the University of Victoria with my 2 children. I was a single parent, and I raised my 2 kids, put them in elementary school, and taught political science and got my PhD. My youngest, most beautiful daughter, she has just graduated and left and moved far away, and I thought it was important that I listen to my favorite Canadian singer, Gord Downie, and do something. And so I am here to be a voice for the children, which obviously in the last week with climate strike, and without leadership on how to do nation-to-nation building, I'm standing for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much.
Rented leg, so I won't step forward. My name is Ron Broda. I'm here to share the little bit that I know and believe about climate, admit what I don't know about climate, and hopefully learn something. As a trained and experienced investigator, I know that the most inefficient way of getting meaningful information is to ask closed-ended yes-no questions. Imagine if I were to pick any one of you in this audience and say, have you stopped abusing alcohol yet? Yes, no, or don't know. What would your answer be? Yeah, exactly. So what I would prefer to do is, why can't we have a conversation on all of these questions and come to some meaningful answers instead of a forced choice? Because you guys have 18 days until the election, so you don't have to make a forced choice either. You have time to inform yourselves, see who's telling you the truth, and learn what all of the issues really are and who's going to deliver.
Thank you. Okay, so we are going to move on to the forced choice questions. All candidates were sent these in advance, so there has been some time to consider. But as I say, I appreciate your point, Ron, that we must always create an atmosphere of conversation and people's ability to change their mind based on new information that makes sense to them. So the answer of I'm not sure or I pass is absolutely legitimate. So the forced choice questions are going to come up here, and here's the first one. Do you accept the evidence of human-induced climate change, both from the scientific community and from the frequency and severity of natural disasters? Okay, we've got 4 yeses. Thank you.
I'd love to answer that completely, because that's a loaded question.
And we will come back to a question on climate change after this. Okay, next question, please. Will you take urgent action to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions as your top priority? Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you consider the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change carbon budget as a good measure of our success in limiting emissions? Okay, thank you. And can everyone see the signs being held up? Okay, we need them a little higher, okay? Okay, the next question is, will you commit to exceed Canada's current targets to reduce carbon emissions to 30% below 2005 levels by 2030? So
We have to double them.
okay. Will you commit to exceed them? Okay. And a point that it might be interesting for the audience, we're very careful to word these questions so that it's not will your party, but rather will you yourself, because we do believe in people voting their conscience. So just want to make sure that's clear. Thank you. Next question. Oh. Okay. I can't remember the question 4 questions ago. Can we just go back to it? Even before the start. Okay, here we go. Will you act to implement a Canada-wide ban on fracking?
I'm holding up the joker card because I don't have enough information to decide that.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question. And with the larger debate questions, there's also a preamble which I'll read because I realize the typeface is a little small. Presently, Canada subsidizes the fossil fuel industry through public financing, tax breaks, direct government spending, fuel subsidies, and the assumption of cleanup costs, and specifically has promised a subsidy of $375 million for LNG Canada. In line with Canada's 10-year-old G20 commitments to end subsidies for fossil fuels, will you cancel all of these subsidies?
No to all corporate welfare, not just these subsidies.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is this working? Are the signs high enough now? Okay, good. Yeah? Okay. Will you uphold the UN Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People, and does this mean that you will halt projects such as Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion where consent of local First Nations has not been given? Okay. Thank you. Youth activist Greta Thunberg, recently said, "We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all we talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. Some say that we, especially the privileged, must radically reduce consumption levels to meet the challenges of the climate crisis. Do you agree?" Okay. The loss of pollinators is expected to devastate our food supply. This is bees, birds, so on. Will you support the ban on neonicotinoids in Canada without further review? Thank you. Will you act to remove all open pen fish farms from the BC coast? Thank you. In the face of surging human migration, will you permit migrants entering Canada from the United States to be eligible for asylum here? Thank you. Human rights, this is the last question for the forced choice. Human rights and environmental abuses by Canadian mining companies in their operations abroad are continuing. Will you legislate tougher consequences for these companies? Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move into the debate questions that were conceived by 100debates.ca. We're going to, again, have a random draw for who gets to start on the question. We'll go clockwise. Each person will have 90 seconds to respond, and then we'll attempt a little discussion at the end. The discussion at the end, what I'm hoping is that by responding and hearing everybody respond for 90 seconds, Then when it comes to the discussion, you've got 2 cards on the table. And so you can use these if you want to make, if you have a particular point you want to make having heard everyone. So you've got 2 points to make just so that we equalize participation. And again, it's only 2.5 minutes, but if there's something burning, we want you to make sure to have a chance. So just flash your card and I'll know that that's going to happen. Okay, so we're going to get into the first question on climate change, and maybe I'll read that first. And this is the preamble, and then the next slide is the question. So the preamble is, per person, Canadians produce the most greenhouse gas pollution of all G20 industrialized nations, nearly 3 times the G20 average. Did we know that about ourselves? According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, only immediate and all-inclusive action encompassing deep decarbonization, complemented by ambitious policy measures, protection and enhancement of carbon sinks and biodiversity, and efforts to remove CO2 from the atmosphere will enable us to meet the Paris Agreement. And the question is, what are the key elements of your action plan to ensure Canada meets its international obligations to reduce greenhouse gas pollution? And who gets to go first? Now I'm going to take Elizabeth out because she's already got a chance.
Yeah, that's what we're all trying to do up there. We're all trying to take Elizabeth out.
Who do you have? Oh, it's David. So David, you've got 90 seconds.
Thank you. It's way down to the other end of the room. Thank you. Our plan is a little bit different from the others in that we're the only party that's looking at both international and domestic sources of CO2 emissions and bring them down. Really quickly, internationally, there's 1,800 new coal plants being built around the world. And we're celebrating because Alberta's closing its 6 remaining coal plants by 2030, I believe it is. We're going the wrong way. We all breathe the same air. And Canada needs to take a role internationally to help the developing countries, especially Africa and Southeast Asia, where most of these coal plants are being built, to make better choices than we made as we electrify. That's one big piece we're looking at in our plan that's somewhat unique from all the others. Now, if we're going to be talking on the international stage, it's also important that we get our own house in order, because I, for one, do not like looking like a hypocrite. Since 2007, our emissions have gone down. Back in 2007, we were about 1.7% of the world emissions. That dropped down to 1.6, and now we're about 1.5. The bad news is, over the last few years, our emissions have been going up. It's just the rest of the world's emissions are going up even faster. Domestically, we're looking at a couple fronts. One, we're going to be scrapping the carbon tax and going with regulatory approach, as it's going to work better, and the money, instead of going into Ottawa, will be reinvested directly into the companies to lower their emissions the following year, or into technology to help make the technology that we're going to need, such as what's happening at the carbon capture plant in Squamish. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be that type of technology that we can export to the world that will allow us to save the world. We can't save the world by ourselves, but we can sure help them do it.
Thank you very much.
I'm very excited about the new democratic plan for the environment because it ensures that, first of all, First Nations people lead the way. And we learned at the beginning of this why that is so important. Greta Thunberg also knew why it was so important, and that is why the Indigenous youth led the climate strike. So it is important that we do that right away, and we learn as much as we can, because as being a colonizer, we are also in this together. We have ourselves been colonized, and we must decolonize and learn what we haven't been able to learn because of the system that we've been living in. Our plan is to create an environmental Bill of Rights enshrined in law so that every Canadian knows that it is their right to have clean air and clean water. We are going to institute UNDRIP, which the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which the New Democrats brought forward in the government but was killed by the Senate. So it was important for us to have deep democratic reforms as well as environmental reforms, because otherwise we can't get them through and we can't do what we need to do quick enough. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what is the reality and what the facts are. How many of you in this room know what the percentage of the entire atmosphere, the so-called greenhouse gases, compose? Would it surprise you to know that it's only 2%? Okay? And of that 2%, how much is carbon dioxide? Any guesses? 4% of the 2% is carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases. Of that, 3.4% is man-made. And of that, only 1.6% is generated by Canada. So if you multiply out the figure, it's infinitesimally small to begin with. And the other thing is I think we need to start using some precise language, because we're talking about a carbon tax. Are we taxing carbon? Really? Because carbon is it's the fourth most common element. It's non-toxic. We're blaming carbon, or taxing carbon, when we're talking about carbon dioxide, which, by the way, is not a toxin either. It's essential to life. It's essential to plant growth. So we really need to look at all of the science and get rid of the hysteria that seems to have swept the discourse.
The key elements of our action plan for me personally and for the Green Party of Canada are summarized in a document called Mission Possible. You can find it on our website, including deep background documents that dive into levels of detail that will leave your eyes crossed. But you have to keep reading. We start with the science, and with all due respect to Ron, Max Bierny said the same thing to me in the house when we used to sit together, and I started explaining to him, it doesn't matter how small a percent of our atmosphere carbon dioxide is. It's the problem. It's such a powerful warming gas that without its presence in the global atmosphere, this planet would have been too cold to sustain life over many millennia. It has never been above 280 parts per million. That's how much of a trace gas carbon dioxide is. Yet without it, the planet would have been too cold for life on Earth to take hold, for human beings to have ever existed. And that greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide, has gone from 280 parts per million to over 400 parts per million because of our burning of fossil fuels since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Based in science, we know we need to double the leftover Harvard target that the Liberals shamefully kept of 30%. It needs to be 60%. The IPCC says that to have a chance of survival, globally we need to cut 45% by 2030. Canada, to pull our fair share, needs to reduce by at least 60%.
Thank you.
So here's our commitment to you, because as Canadians, we all play a part in this. We're talking about per capita emissions. I play a part, you play a part, we all play a part in this. How we get to net zero by 2050 is what we need to be talking about. We introduced a carbon price, which, by the way, was envisioned green in 2015. I voted green in 2015. I'm your Liberal candidate in 2019 because we had the audacity to challenge the Conservatives and introduce a carbon price, a carbon tax. Conservatives have an excellent plan how not to address or take climate change seriously. And we need to get there now. We need to figure out how, but we need to bring all of us along. So we need to build on the carbon price by building a retrofit economy, allowing all of us to make our homes more energy efficient, continue to support the adoption of electric vehicles, solar power, all of that. Phasing out coal by 2030 matters in Canada. It's an example to the rest of the world. I cannot believe what the Conservatives are saying, that it doesn't matter in Canada. It matters that we are shutting down coal by 2030, and I'm incredibly proud to be here as the Liberal candidate, standing up for what we will do. And by the way, we're going to plant 2 billion trees, because using the power of nature to fight climate change makes sense. Thanks.
Well, the nice thing is we're ahead of time, so we don't have to have a 2.5-minute discussion. I think we can put it to 4. And so I'm interested, if you have more to say on this subject, please show me. Okay, Elizabeth?
I appreciate the chance to weigh in on this. This is, as I think all of you know from coming to town hall meetings with me over the last 8 years, the climate crisis has worsened since we first committed to address it in 1992 at the Earth Summit. Since we committed, and in those days Canada was actually in the lead, but in 1992 at the Earth Summit, when we signed the Framework Convention on Climate Change, we were serious at that time. I thought we would succeed. I don't know how many of you remember when we used to call the 1990s the turnaround decade. I thought we were going to do it. Between 1992 and today, the planet, human societies, and Canada have burned more fossil fuels between 1992 and 2019 than between the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in 1992, when we promised to take action. So there are many good small steps that the parties on this stage will commit to doing, but they're not prepared to accept the target that's required. The Liberal target remains 30% below 2005. The Conservative target remains 30% below 2005. It's quite clear the Liberals will get closer to failure than the Conservatives will, because they'll fail totally. And the NDP target is 38%. And this isn't to take pot shots at politics. We're going to have to do this together. We need the equivalent of a war cabinet inside our cabinet that focuses solely on how we transform our economy and get to where we need to get. So I'll say to Ryan, I was disgusted with Justin Trudeau's announcement. I was initially excited that we were going to plant 2 billion trees. Our plan, by the way, calls for planting 30,000 hectares a year every year for 30 years. It comes to a bit more, to a lot more trees. But when Trudeau finished his pledge to plant trees, he said we'd get the money from the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So I'm sorry, but we do not waste $10 to $13 billion of public money on the Trans Mountain Pipeline to boost greenhouse gas emissions while pretending that somehow that helps us plant trees. The appalling hypocrisy of the 2 billion. By the way, Ethiopia planted 2 billion trees this year. We have to do better, and we can, and we really do need to work together. I don't doubt Ryan's sincerity or that of Sabina or anyone on this stage. But the reality is, in this election, we need as many Greens elected to Parliament as possible all across this country so that we can ensure that in a minority Parliament, we don't continue to kick it down the road to our children, because time is up.
Just a minute. I just want to clarify with the timekeeper so I can keep it fair. How long was that? 2.5 minutes. Okay. So, okay.
Excuse me. I'd like to have a word if I could.
Okay.
Has anybody here been to the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria? How many of you have? Okay. Is that a credible source of information? Do you believe what they put on display there? Yeah. Well, I've recently gone to the second floor of the Museum of Natural History. And did you know that 66 to 100 million years ago, right here in British Columbia, the temperature was 10 to 15 degrees warmer than it is now? I don't think humans caused that. I don't think that there was any tailpipe emissions causing that.
So I'm
Did
going to
you-
interrupt you there just because I'd like you to stick with the question.
Well, this is the question related to
Well,
greenhouse gases.
I'd like to know, do you have an action plan around this?
Yeah, I'd like to finish my statement if I may. You didn't interrupt Ms.
No, it
May.
feels like we're getting onto a narrative, though.
Well, I thought we were having a conversation here to actually find out what the facts are and discover what the truth is.
Well, as long as it relates to the question.
Well, isn't climate history related to the question? We're blaming carbon or carbon dioxide on today's situation when there's credible evidence that 100 million years ago it was in fact warmer without carbon dioxide.
Okay.
What? Exactly. How many people lived on the planet and it was warmer, right? But we're talking about climate change. The reality is that the climate has always changed. It will continue to change. And why are you afraid of hearing the truth? We need to know the facts so that we can make intelligent decisions.
And so am I hearing that you don't have a concern about climate change?
No, you're not hearing that.
Okay.
You're putting
Can you
words in my
clarify?
mouth.
Well, I'm
okay?
asking you. Can
Okay.
you clarify?
Climate change is real. It is happening. We have to accept that. What we need to do is find out what the real effects are going to be on us so that we can adapt and have a better chance of survival and maintaining our lifestyle. We cannot prevent climate change from happening. We live in one of the most active earthquake zones in the world. Can we prevent an earthquake? Can we? What we've done is adapted our building codes so that we have better survivability. And that same principle translates to climate change. We cannot stop it.
Okay. Okay, Ryan, you can go. And then David, and then Sabina, you'll have the last word. So you've got 2.5 minutes, is what I
can assure
understand.
all of you, regardless of how you vote, I take this climate crisis as serious as Ms. May, who I have a lot of respect for. I chose to be up here because I saw a plan developing that already gets us 75% of the way towards our 2030 targets. We have another 25% to make up. I would like very much to earn your vote to go to Ottawa, make up that 25%, and then exceed it. But I think you have to meet your priorities. And if we can meet it ahead of 2030, I will find ways to do that. But I think we have a long way to go. We've got the highest per capita emission. 30% is not easy, folks. I have knocked on so many doors in Saanich-Gulf Islands. And many of us, I'm fortunate I don't have to, but many of us still rely on natural gas to heat our homes. 1 in 2 Canadian households is relying on natural gas. Fortis BC is selling natural gas actively on the radio as a cheaper alternative. This is what we're fighting against. We have to bring all Canadians along in a retrofit economy to help us meet our targets and meet them ahead of 2030. Then we can talk about the next how to get beyond that and hit net zero by 2050. That's the plan I'm committed to. That is what I will do for you if I am your MP. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
I'd like to start by correcting Mr. Windsor. At no point did I say what we do here at home doesn't matter. Quite the opposite. What we do here at home does matter. But also what happens abroad also matters. When the last Conservative government came to power in 2007, our emissions were about just under 750 megatons. I think it was 744. During the recession, that dropped down to 680, maybe 682. Rose again in 2014, and then it was dropping again year after year, up until about 2016 when it started climbing. Since 2016, we've been going in the wrong direction. That would be under Mr. Windsor's party. We need to get the emissions down here in Canada and abroad. Even if Canada gets its emissions to 0 tomorrow with some kind of magic wand, well, we'll still burn if the world doesn't make their emissions. And that's why we have to look and help the global fight on this. It's important, again, that we do work at getting our emissions under control here and get them going back in the right direction and work at making our targets because, again, no one's going to listen to someone who isn't practicing what they preach. But we also have to make sure that the world's emissions get down. And with 1,800 coal plants being built abroad, that's a lot of CO2 going up into the air that could be prevented with better choices. So we need to take this fight global because we cannot solve it alone. And at no time did I ever say that it doesn't matter what we do here alone, Mr. Windsor.
I feel like I didn't quite answer the question, so thank you for extra time to do that. We want to have a carbon-free electricity by 2030. We're absolutely concerned about dropping greenhouse gas emissions in every way possible, planting trees, creating zero-emission vehicles within Canada, powering our economies on carbon-free emissions. We all have to work together on that. And that's why I'm very proud of our leader, Jagmeet Singh, for continuing to say that we need to work together, we need to be together, we need to set aside our differences, and no party in the world cannot be green. Every country in the world, every party in the world needs to work on this issue right now. We are going to do that by starting to use your money for you so that you can have a better quality of life and be able to make better decisions, environmental decisions, sustainable decisions for yourself and for your communities.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thanks to our timekeepers, and we got a little more on that subject than we thought we originally had time for. So we're going to move on to the next question on water. And in this question, I'm going to read it to you, then each candidate will have 90 seconds, and then we'll do a shorter discussion round with timed responses. So Canada has the longest coastline in the world and is home to roughly half the world's lakes, half the world's fresh water, and roughly 1/4 of the world's wetlands. Industrial development and climate change is having an impact on our water resources. The Insurance Bureau of Canada has noted that climate change, as well as the historic loss of wetlands across Canada due to industrial development, has led to a massive 250% increase in flooding over the past 2 decades, as well as to a reduction in water quality and wildlife habitat. And so the question is, what will your party do to protect clean water and sources on our coast, reduce water pollution and the risk of flood events that have been aggravated by industrial development and climate change? What will your party do? And so, oh, I can't do this. Who am I going to go? You are the lucky one. Ron, it's your lucky day. Yay. You've got 90 seconds to talk about what will your party do to protect clean water sources on our coast.
Well, water is our second most important resource after air. And it's very important that we do keep our water clean and that we become better stewards of our water. There are initiatives to clean up the plastics and debris that are floating around. We've seen some great developments in Canadian-built technology to help skim out some of these plastic particles. I believe there's even one of those devices being tried out in the local marina here in North Saanich. And we would like to encourage that type of Canadian ingenuity and technology moving forward to export that technology around the world to help the water or the nations clean up their waters as well. The reality is that the climate is changing and we're going to see differences in our coastlines because of that. And really the provincial governments and local governments have a responsibility in terms of their land use policies and zoning to not allow development on floodplains and to be proactive in looking at what aren't currently floodplains but may well become floodplains as sea levels rise and as the climate does change.
Thank you. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Tough crowd, tough crowd.
90 seconds.
Okay, this is a complex question because it addresses, as you can see, water quality, as well as sea level rise and other climatic events as they impact our water. I want to start by saying that the overarching imperative is to go off fossil fuels as quickly as possible because sea level rise isn't fixed. Depending on when we go off fossil fuels and adjust to a different global average temperature increase and hold to it, for instance 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is the advice of the IPCC, if we hold to that, we can probably hold to no more than 1 meter sea level rise. But if we go above 1.5 to 2 or 3, the risks of losing the Western Antarctic ice sheet, just one example, we lose the Western Antarctic ice sheet, we're faced with 8 meter sea level rise. So we can prepare for one, it's very hard to prepare for the other. We definitely need to protect water at source, we need to protect watersheds, they are our green infrastructure. We need to plan our floodplains provincially and federally. We used to have floodplain management, we ditched it in the early 1970s. We need to get it back. We need adaptation strategies to protect water at source and for the problem of water contamination. The less water we have, for instance in the Great Lakes, because of evaporation, the more contaminated it will be. So we have to plan ahead, stop using fossil fuels, prepare and adapt to those levels of flooding we can no longer avoid, while we also ensure that water is protected at source from contamination.
Building on the $2 billion that we have already invested in helping our cities either prepare for or help prevent and mitigate the response to disasters, we're going to invest an additional $1 billion to help cities do the important work that they, and municipalities and local governments, to do the work that they often know best in their community. I look at our own municipal infrastructure right here in Saanich-Gulf Islands. We have a considerable amount of wastewater infrastructure that was built 50 years ago. It needs significant investments to keep it working. So we need to work directly with municipalities to make sure that our sewage does not wind up on our coastline, contaminating our bay. I love Brentwood Bay, the Sneakwith, which is Todd Inlet, and frankly, the whole coastline needs to be protected, so we need to be working very closely with cities. I know our Liberal government has been working through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to make sure that these investments are flowing. Gas tax revenue, for example, I know that's something that we want to phase out, but the reality is it's helping to pay for infrastructure in our cities that is so critically needed. So I believe that these are the tools that we need to build upon to help us prepare.
Thank you.
For those of you who haven't had the chance to read our plan, I'd suggest going to realplan.ca. It'll give you a very detailed outline of what it is we propose to do, because I simply can't go over it all tonight in a minute and a half. One of the things we'll be looking to do, though, to help protect our water, because let's face it, fresh water is a commodity we don't want to be wasting, is to restore a number of programs canceled by the Liberals. This includes the community-led National Wetland Conservation Fund and the community-led Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnership Group program. We'll also be looking to reconvene the Hunting and Angling Advisory Panel that the Liberals disbanded, so that those with the greatest interest in protecting species and habitats can share their expertise in how it will be done. And this requires constructive consultations, and that means listening to what people are saying and not jumping to conclusions with all the stakeholders, including the Indigenous groups. We'll also be looking to maintain the Community Habitat Stewardship Program for the species at risk, create a new fund for community-based projects targeted to wildlife enhancement, and we'll also take action on reducing plastic waste by harmonizing recycling standards across the provinces and working with industry to cut down on excessive packaging. I'd like to go on this, but I'm running out of time. Please check out the website page or come and talk to me afterwards. Thank you.
I suppose in order to do that, you're going to have to talk with the provinces, and the former Conservative government did not do that. So the new Democratic plan will absolutely protect 30% of our land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030. We will protect our oceans, and we recognize it is important to fight climate change and work to restore our fresh waters. We will create a national freshwater strategy and fully restore navigable waters. I recently got married, July 19th, and my husband and I, who's back there, we went to Main Island, and we met people who worked for Ocean's Legacy. They're a wonderful group of young people who are taking plastics out of the ocean and turning it into usable products. We also went and tied on Pender Island, we tied eelgrass, because there's a group called the Sea Conservation Group, which is trying to restore eelgrass there, and we also helped the Tetiac cleanup of the Tetiac Lake, river, sorry, with the ocean peninsula streams. So there's a lot of great initiatives that are happening on the peninsula, and the federal government needs to be there supporting them and to be working with all these lovely young people and older people and to support the initiatives that are happening here. Thank you.
I do appreciate how you're working with the timing here, because we are coming up in 10 minutes to a break, but we have a few minutes to discuss this, and I'm wondering, do any of you have follow-up comments on water quality and what you and your party are looking to do about it?
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about water quality and quantity. The federal capacity in science was significantly reduced in the Harper era, and we have yet to rehire back the kind of capacity we need within the government of Canada to work on issues of water quality, to ensure that we have solid science to govern our decisions. We also, of course, do need to ban single-use plastic items. That's related to this question in terms of ocean contamination. And I really, there's so much we can do in industrial systems with closed-loop systems. The technology to allow us to keep pollutants out of our streams and waterways, to restore the ecosystems, is far above what it was even a couple decades ago. But we haven't captured those innovations that are much more common in Europe. So I don't want to dominate the time, but there's a lot more we can do.
Thank you. Ryan.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And yes, we did see the Institute of Ocean Sciences right here in Saanich-Gulf Islands become a very, very quiet place during the previous Conservative government. And, I see there's a fan in the room of iOS, and I'm glad that, because when I was knocking on doors the other day, I actually came across a couple of retired scientists who were glad to see that the Institute of Ocean Sciences did have vibrancy again to it. And we may need to build on that. I appreciate the point, Elizabeth, so I know if you're there or if I'm there, we're both going to be pushing for that. So I think Sabina will push for it. I hope, David, you would challenge the Conservatives if in fact you got there over me. Your party didn't have a good track record, because I was in there a lot and you could hear crickets. So, and in terms of banning single-use plastics, this is something that I've certainly seen local governments struggle with. The City of Victoria has explored a plastic bag ban. They're taking it to the Supreme Court. Realistically, any party not talking about banning single-use harmful plastics at this point is totally out of touch.
Thank you. Over to Ron. And then,
Well, as a trained investigator, I firmly believe in gathering all the evidence as you can, and I think we do need to restore the level of scientific inquiry at the federal level so that we are getting valid evidence to base our decisions on moving forward. Single-use plastics, that become the bane of our waterways. And really, it's kind of a symptom of how our society has evolved. Remember when they used to make products that lasted, that weren't throwaway? The problem is now that it's actually cheaper to buy something new than to repair it, which is criminal, I think. So I think we need to get back to a philosophy in general of building durable products that are meant to last, that you can actually fix, right?
okay, thank you. Rapid response. Let's just give David, and then I'll give it to you. Okay. David says, oh, very nice.
My rapid response was just to try to get Ron's vote by pointing out that our platform calls for legislating the right to repair, so that any product you buy, you have a right to be able to get spare parts and keep it in use.
Wow. Thank you. Okay.
And just to follow up on that, as someone who basically you will be prying my BlackBerry out of my cold, dead hands, but they don't make it anymore, and it's hard to get it fixed, I would also be seconding that. But just really quickly, I wasn't going to bring it up until my closing, but as Ryan mentioned on it, I'm not going to Ottawa to go yes or no, sir. The Conservative Party has in its constitution that all votes are free votes unless it's a competence motion, something I fully intend to put to the test in Ottawa, because we need representation at the table where the decisions are being made.
Thank you. Sabina, would you like to add anything? You're okay. Can I just have feedback from the crowd? Is the sound okay? Okay. People can see okay? Great. Well, then a couple announcements before we take a quick 10-minute break. One is that there's a question sheet still going around And we're going to be gathering those at the end of the break so that we're ready for audience questions. So if you have a question, please make sure to write it down. Those will be drawn randomly, but we'll also be looking for similarities between them. Thank you very much for your participation. There's a question here. Where is the question sheet, please? It was recycled. Where is it? I didn't see where that showed up. Can someone put their hand up about where the question sheet is? We're going to find the question sheet and bring it to the front. Have a good 10-minute break. Thank you for your attention up to this point. Any feedback is welcome. Yeah, both of you need to do a little more rock and roll.
Got it.
Okay.
Thanks, Emery.
For sure. Did you get my email that I sent to you in the last 24 hours? Okay. That's okay. Can you get this to Janet? Okay.
Would you ask again for people to raise their hands? If there's, according to the sound man back there, Adam, there's still standees at the back box.
There's still one?
Standees, people who are standing.
Okay, okay. Okay. We're going to get started again. And again, if you have a chair beside you that's empty, there's people standing at the back. If they want to sit down, please come. There are some seats here at the front. Three more seats at the front if you want them. Okay. Well, I don't think I have ever seen a 10-minute break in my life. And I do a lot of work with groups. So this is a small miracle that just happened right here. And thank you for sticking to the time. This gives us potentially more time for audience questions, and they are coming in. So thank you for sticking with us. We're going to move into the next question from 100debates.ca. And again, this first slide is a preamble, which I will read to you, and then the question will follow. We are failing to protect natural beauty, wildlife, and the spectacular wilderness areas that Canadians value. 50% of wildlife, animal, plant species are in decline, and our last surviving ancient forest and Canada's boreal forests are threatened. These are Canada's carbon sinks. Successive governments accelerate these losses by failing to obtain consent and the active participation of Indigenous peoples in the very territories that are their territorial home. 94% of Canadians value the emotional and physical benefits of spending time in nature. However, 82% say that they're concerned that future generations won't have close or easy access to nature. And so the question is, what will you do to protect the quality and quantity of vital wilderness ecosystems throughout the country while respecting the constitutionally protected treaty and land rights of Indigenous people and UNDRIP? And UNDRIP is the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So, I've only got 2 people at the end who can win this game, and I can't do it. Forgetting. I'm going to come over here. It's yours, Sabina.
The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is something I've been doing some work on for a while. Just recently, I gave a paper at the British Columbia BCPSA. What does it stand for? British Columbia Political Science Association meeting. And we're looking at the different ways that sovereignty is related to our own sovereignty. So how do nation-to-nation relations exist? And I think there's been a lot of uncertainty in our cultures and our businesses and what we're doing and how we're going to do this and how we're going to reconcile and how we're going to be able to live together. But we can, we have to, and we need to. And there are strategies, there are many theories, and there are many ways that people have talked about creating nation-to-nation relations that can be good for all of us and that are necessary for all of us. So as far as species at risk go, the New Democrats will use the tools available under the Species at Risk Act and ensure the implementation of recovery strategies to preserve biodiversity for generations to come. Again, First Nations will be leading They are the protectors of our waterways. They understand how waterways work, and we will work with them and with all of the organizations in this peninsula to help protect species and water. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Ron.
Well, I'll confess that I really don't know much about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And I don't really have a lot of faith in a lot of documents coming out of the United Nations recently. And the reality is, in theory, they're not supposed to be binding on us anyway. What our party does believe in is sitting down with our First Nations people and respecting the treaties and getting rid of that archaic Indian Act. It's long overdue that there was some meaningful dialogue with our Indigenous peoples to create a true partnership and include them in our society fully. In terms of protecting wilderness and ecosystems, once we eliminate corporate welfare and divert money that's being wasted on other nebulous products or projects, I think we should restore the level of science that's going on in our Ministry of Environment, and in particular with Parks Canada. People that work in the field as conservation officers and ecologists are the best to give us some relevant data to make good information and choices in how we're going to protect our wilderness and our wildlife.
Thank you.
But I haven't mentioned, by the way, that our platform is all online and everything I'm talking about tonight has much more detail in the platform. But we're fully committed to protecting 30% of Canada's lands, our marine areas, with conservation protection by 2030. We actually have a new and innovative program that's been, well, it's not completely our idea by any means. It exists. It's called the Indigenous Guardians Program, where Indigenous-led governance is utilized for protection of ecosystems. So we're committing $100 million a year for the next 4 years for the expansion of Indigenous stewardship of lands within their territories. We also desperately need to restore funding to Parks Canada. They had a 10% budget cut in 2012, and it's not been restored. We need to ensure that we do everything within the Government of Canada with respect to the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Absolutely all decisions about land and territories need to be seen through that lens. And lastly, we need to restore funding to departments. The species at risk group within Environment Canada is so small that it took them 14 years between when the southern resident killer whales were listed and when they developed an inadequate recovery plan. It's pathetically underfunded, understaffed, and we need to take protecting endangered species seriously.
Thanks. The opportunity that I've had working with the Indigenous community right here on the Saanich Peninsula has been something that I have greatly appreciated. And the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People means to have meaningful dialogue, meaningful conversation. I've had that opportunity. It is a journey that I believe we all need to be on while we protect Canada's marine and land areas. They're committed in a remarkably similar fashion to 25% of protection for marine and land-based areas for parks by 2025. So that I don't have the Green Party to get there by 2030 if they ever form government.
30%, so that's where we are.
We're 5 years sooner, so I guess anyway, to my mind, meaningful dialogue is absolutely necessary as we sit down to make those commitments. Whether they're 30% by 2030 or 25 by 25, we need to have those meaningful conversations, and I look forward to being part of those in the future.
What are some of the things we'll do to protect the quality and quantity of our wilderness? We'll maintain a national conservation programs, including the North America Waterfowl Management Plan and the National Heritage Conservation Program. We'll also be looking to reinforce the protection against pests and invasive species that are threatening our habitats. And the government under Andrew Scheer will also be looking to create a new fund for community-based projects to target wildlife enhancement. I spoke about a few of the other ones earlier, such as bringing back the hunters and anglers committee groups, as well as the National Wetland Conservation Fund. But we'll also be looking to reinstate protections for meaningful community consultations that were taken away by the Liberal government. And we're committing to set aside 17% of Canada's terrestrial area and 10% of the marine area as agreed to under previous governments. We'll also lead a science-based terrestrial and marine conservation assessment to identify the best opportunities for the expansion of our protected area network, including parks and marine protected areas, national wildlife areas, and wild bird sanctuaries. Yes, I know this sounds weird, a conservative talking about science-based. I would remind you, I do actually have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees.
Okay, now the discussion. We need to be on the same page. 45 seconds each for responses. And I'm interested, I'd like to hear a little more. You know, as Greta says, we're running out of time. And so these natural spaces are key to being able to draw down these greenhouse gas emissions. So we've heard some specifics. What else do you want us to know about what you or your party would do in order to address protecting wild spaces? Ryan.
Sure. So I see an intrinsic link between 2 billion trees that we're planting, ecosystem restoration, and the protection of marine areas and land-based park areas as all mutually part of how we restore mountain caribou, which are critically endangered in this province. I've had the opportunity to speak with those who have the knowledge, some of whom have retired but are still willing to give their knowledge. So whether it's scientists in or out of government, those conversations are so critical to understanding. In the same way that the conversations with Indigenous communities and Indigenous knowledge are so critical to us rectifying mistakes of the past, and that's why I'm committed.
I'm going to take a slightly different cut at this just to bring everybody up to speed on what's happened to environmental assessment. If you're protecting a critical wilderness ecosystem, suppose it's critical habitat for one species. There's a project proposed that will wipe that out. What happened in 2013 under Stephen Harper was the eradication of, well, basically the repeal of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act as it was developed under the Mulroney administration. And putting in place one that reduced the number of project reviews from about 4,000 to 5,000 a year to less than 100 by absolutely scrapping most of the environmental reviews or triggers for environmental reviews. Liberals promised to fix that, brought in Bill C-69. Based on the howls of protest from the oil industry, you would think that C-69 was actually good legislation. It wasn't. It won't protect wilderness at all. Most projects will get a go-ahead without ever having an environmental review.
Thank you.
Well, with due respect to Greta, she's a young woman of passion who genuinely believes what she's saying, but she's also creating a lot of undue anxiety because there really isn't that great an emergency. Well, hear me out, please, hear me out.
So if we can just,
Be interrupted, please.
well, I also want you to work towards the question of what are you talking about to protect wild spaces?
Well, you're in the introduction to this roundup introduced with due respect to Greta and the emergency, and we're running out of time. So I want to address that comment because, in fact, we are not running out of time.
Oh.
We have lots of time if we step back and don't panic. I know as a trained investigator and as a licensed commercial pilot, in a real emergency, the last thing you want is panic. We need to look at all of the evidence. And there's a great deal of the evidence that is not being shared and is being concealed from you. And you need to go home and do your homework to see what the reality is so that we can make good, informed decisions that will actually protect our environment and our wildlife. And yes, I see you frantically waving the red flag.
Thank you. Mark, would you like to comment? Again, let's maintain respect.
Well, respectfully, the United Nations.
It's not working?
The United Nations is a very important institution that we have needed since the end of World War II in order to allow us to work together as a globe. There are sometimes 9,000 nations across the globe that meet at the United Nations. So that means there are indigenous nations in Scandinavia, in Finland, in Australia, New Zealand, all over the planet, and they all meet. In fact, the first time they met as the World Council of Indigenous People was in Port Alberni in the 1970s. And they came from all over the world, Ecuador, Guyana, Finland, Scandinavia. It is very important. We were one of the last countries to sign on to UNDRIP, and it's important that we take a stand and say we want this to happen and we want to recognize the rights of people around the world.
Where's the other mic? Is down there. Okay. Thank you.
So, you only get one now.
Thank you, Teresa.
I was thinking I was going to have both talking sticks. I'm happy to move on just to the next question because I know the time's getting close and I'd like to make sure we have time for questions from the audience.
Okay. Okay. So then the next question is on pollution and toxic substances, and this gets to some of the comments that have already been made about single-use plastics and ocean health. Air pollution is the leading environmental cause of death and illness in Canada, which is the only Western industrialized nation without legally binding national air pollution standards. Our laws and regulations do not address emerging threats from newer toxic substances in foods and consumer products. Many of these substances have demonstrated links to cancer, genetic damage, and developmental problems, chronic illness, and many other health effects. These effects are often more severe for children and other vulnerable populations. Our overarching toxics law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, has not been significantly strengthened in 20 years. What will you do to ensure that Canadians are better protected from the health and environmental impacts of toxic substances? Do you commit to strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and Pest Control Products Act, as many of these pesticides are ending up in our foods? So that is the question, and I believe, am I right that you're the last one, Ryan, to start off a question?
I have no idea.
Well, I think it's your go. You've got 90 seconds to tell us what will you do. Do you commit to strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protections Act and Pest Control Products Act? And other thoughts on toxic substances?
It's a great question, and the preamble, honestly, is something that gives you a lot to digest. I'll be honest, and I would rely heavily on experts. We need to employ the scientists to tell us the information we need in order to do that. So, yeah, at first blush, I do believe that strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and Pest Control Producers Act is something we need to look at. It hasn't been done in 20 years. Obviously, we need the evidence to support the decisions we're making. I think it's the government's job to make sure that we have the critical resources we need to make the right kind of legislation going forward. And that would certainly be what I would do, but we also need to consult with the community, to listen to individuals, to farmers, to all of the people in our community who have concerns and who have knowledge to share on this. And that would be the basis for me to build the legislation that would update those two acts after 20 years.
Thank you. And the mic is going all the way down to the end to David. Thank you.
As I mentioned, my background is heavily in healthcare and the health sciences. I remember when I was going to university, I was doing my nursing degree back in Northern Ontario, and it was one day in February where literally we had a smog day coming up from Toronto. And that was when I realized for my first hand, wait a minute, this is a problem. When you're looking at the pollution in our atmosphere, especially the particulates coming out in smog, that's asthma, that's emphysema, that's bronchitis, that's even heart attack and strokes. It is a major health problem. If for that reason alone, we need to combat it. Our healthcare system's already under enough strain as it is, but that's a story for another day. So yes, I would definitely be committing to strengthen the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, an act which we brought in, so I think it's only fitting that the Conservatives strengthen it.
I will just use this opportunity to explain the new Democratic plan and why we believe that affordability and healthcare are inextricably linked with the environmental crisis that we're facing. So yes, we will go beyond making the Canadian Environmental Protection Act by having a Bill of Rights, Environmental Bill of Rights, and pest control products. The New Democrats also introduced a local food day and a food waste strategy and a food plan. So we want to protect local food, we want to help people grow local food, and we want to expand healthcare. So you'll know that the New Democrats are the party that brought you healthcare, brought you the Canadian Pension Plan, brought you employment insurance. We want to expand and protect all of those programs, and we want to make sure that Canada gets a fair farm care program. So that means that if your doctor tells you you have bronchitis, then you get that medication for free with your health card and not your credit card. We are committed to expanding programs by cracking down 1% on the 1%, by getting back the money that's being thrown away on tax havens and offshore tax havens where people don't pay money, and using that money for you. For dental care, for people who don't have it, for income security for old age pensions, for at-home caregivers. Healthcare is where we stand, and it's going to help you combat the climate crisis.
Well, my background's in law enforcement, and I'm not really clear on what's meant by strengthen these acts. The preamble refers to that there are newer emerging threats from newer toxic substances. So I'm wondering if it's two-pronged. Does the act or regulations need to be expanded to include substances that are not identified in it as part of it? Is it also in terms of strengthening, are we talking about enforcement? Are we talking about penalties? Are the penalties not adequate? Is there not sufficient enforcement? I'm not particularly familiar with either of these acts, but I can tell you from my policing background that our criminal laws are quite adequate and have quite adequate penalties, but they're not being fully applied by the courts. And I don't know if that situation translates into this realm of legislation as well. So if this act is truly 20 years old, it's definitely due for review. And it obviously needs to be an all-encompassing review to see if all of the substances that should be in it are, and if they're not, add it to it. And perhaps we do need to look at the penalties and see if they're being adequately enforced out in the real world to deal with any transgressions of the act.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm so old that I helped draft the Canadian Environmental Protection Act more than 30 years ago. And it definitely needs strengthening. It wasn't good enough at the time because it's supposed to be comprehensive toxic chemical legislation, but it left out commercial chemicals like pesticides because of the lobby from the pesticide industry. So one, we need to embed in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, in its rewriting, a Bill of Rights to protect people and to protect the environment. We need a right to a healthy environment. It needs to take over the Pest Control Products Act, which is basically a piece of legislation that ensures that we use toxic chemicals, believe they are safe, right up to the minute they are banned. Speaking of banning, we want to ban forestry use, lawn use, and use as a desiccant. All uses of glyphosate, it should be banned so that we can protect human health and protect the environment. So when we look at the network of laws we have around toxic chemicals, they need to be modernized. But one very cool thing about the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is that it does list carbon dioxide as a toxic substance. The Minister of the Environment has the right now to regulate any company, any industry, anywhere across Canada, and set the limit they're allowed to emit of CO2. I wish Catherine McKenna had used the act. We used it, I got a red flag. It's time to use it.
Okay, additional thoughts. Has anyone got any additional thoughts on this question? Okay, then we're right into questions from the audience. Yay. Let me make sure I have them all. I'm going to take the first one off the top because I believe it had 8 people asking the same question. So it's been rewritten for all of you, for all 8 of you in one sentence. And it's not to anyone in particular, so I have another thing of beads here. What action do you personally have in place now to reduce CO2 emissions? Do you walk the talk? And we're just going to go actually down the line. Ryan, what are you doing yourself to reduce CO2 emissions? Do you walk the talk? 45 seconds.
My car is electric. I have 35 solar panels on the roof of my house. My heating system is electric. I burn very minimal amounts of fossil fuel once or twice a year when I have to drive my pickup truck for farm use, and I own a small tractor. Both of those have the best environmental systems that they could possibly have on them. So I personally try and have as low a CO2 footprint as possible.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly in my personal life try as hard as I can. I didn't own a car for 27 years, and then ironically, as leader of the Green Party, I had to get, at that point, the best I could get was Prius to reduce emissions. I've been vegetarian since I was 10. I think we have to eat more of a plant-based diet. Again, in terms of my personal life, my daughter came home from grade 8 having done her carbon footprint and said, "Mom, we can't take any more vacations that involve flying." So she's now 28. I haven't taken a discretionary flight in terms of something for fun for my daughter or me in all those years. So it's horrific, the carbon footprint that we have as MPs. Horrific. I'm the only member of Parliament I know who buys carbon offsets for all my trips. And in this election campaign, I know that Justin Trudeau has to have a backup plane, but they're buying carbon credits. Mr. Scheer's not buying any credits at all, and I'm out of time.
Pass it down the line. Thank you.
Well, I'm not really sure that carbon dioxide's really the villain. But I do believe that we shouldn't be wasting our resources and burning fuel unnecessarily. I prefer to ride my motorcycle because it's fun and it uses a lot less gas and it's fun. My house is heated electrically. I have electric heat. Other than that, you know, I think I try to be reasonable in my use of resources and not waste them. We live in a very wasteful society, and I think that if we get into the habit of reusing things and buying durable things, which I try to do, that are going to last, that reduces the carbon footprint, if that really is the villain, which I don't think it is.
Okay, thank you. Moving on down the line, Sabina, do you walk the talk?
It's quite a personal question. Yes, I guess as hard as I can. I live, work, and my kids went to school as close as possible. So we walk as much as possible to get groceries, to go to school, to go to work. Unfortunately, no bank at the moment will allow me to buy an electric vehicle. I don't have no one's going to give me a loan to do that. So hopefully one day that might be the case, but things have to be more affordable for all of us, and we have to be given the options and the ability to do it, because for many of us it's kind of hard. I've met a Sierra Club lady who, you know, has to get in her car to drive her kids to school. It's really hard to figure out how we're going to do this unless we get the support we need from the governments around us. Thank you.
I like to try to find things I have in common with other people, and this is one where I have in common with Ron. I really try to avoid buying new things unless I have to, and I can tell you it's driven my campaign team nuts because they want me to get a new phone. I like my BlackBerry. It works just fine for what I need to do. I don't need something with all the new fancy bells and whistles, and so I try to minimize what I go out and buying. But for me, the big one is cycling to work. And That may not sound quite so impressive, excepting I live in Gordon Head, and I work down at Fisherman's Wharf. And I tell you, it's not always all that fun on those rainy January days.
No chance for this one. Okay, thank you. Here's your next question, and maybe we'll start at that end and come all the way back. How will your party pay for rapid investment in green technology without harming the welfare of Canadians, particularly those on lower income? How will your party pay for rapid investment in green technology without harming the welfare of Canadians, particularly those on lower incomes?
Twofold on this one. Our party is committed to pulling back $1.5 billion of corporate subsidies every year, and whether it's from fossil fuels or other large companies, Loblaws can buy their own trucks. So that'll go part of the way towards funding that. The other big thing that we're doing is instead of the carbon tax, now carbon taxes, the economists say, are the best way of doing it, but only if every country in the world does it, and it needs to be several $100s per ton. And if you're not going to do the second part, you're just wasting time with the first. So we're looking at regulations, and we'll be taking, rather than the money going into general revenue into the government where it just happens to get lost, at least half of it seems to be getting lost, we'll be having that go straight back into making the corporations more environmentally friendly the very next year to lower emissions, or alternatively they can put it into an investment fund directly for universities and other companies doing green technology research.
Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure I can. How will your party pay for rapid investment in green technology without harming the welfare of Canadians, particularly those on lower income? And is there a hand in the audience of where this question came from, or a couple, just so we know? Great, thank you.
Thank you. This is a very fundamental part of our plan. It's important that we look at the climate emergency as something that we all need to deal with together, and if we leave anyone behind, the plan is just not going to work. So we have investments for people who need it, and we're going to pay for it by taxing 1% on the 1%. So we're talking about people whose income is $20 million a year, that they can pay more, and by doing that, that will pay for pharmacare, that'll pay for helping us to build zero-emission vehicles right here in Canada, to get us employed in zero-emission industries, and to create technology. We will create a climate bank in order to allow us to do that.
I want to repeat it one more time.
Sure. How will your party pay for rapid investment in green technology without harming the welfare of Canadians, particularly those on a lower income?
Well, I think the first responsibility of government is to look after our people and protect them. I think previous governments have demonstrated over and over again that they don't do very well when they get involved in business themselves, and they usually wind up making a mess of things. We need to encourage entrepreneurs to take full advantage of the opportunity that's available to them, because they're more likely to develop something that's both profitable and usable that consumers will want to take advantage of. Sabina mentioned earlier, there aren't really options for many people that they can afford. You know, if we had an affordable option for cleaner transportation or mass transportation, for example, like, you know, the Galloping Goose Trail is wonderful. Back before I was an amputee, I used to cycle to work when I was a Saanich police officer. I can probably get on a bike now with my new implant, but you know, that would be an ideal place to put LRT on the peninsula, parallel to the Galloping Goose Trail. It's a former rail bed, and it could coexist with the use now. You really don't want to let me finish, do you?
It's not personal. Thank you.
I'm so proud of what we've brought out as a platform, because in Mission Possible, we take Canada to 60% less greenhouse gases by 2030. It does involve a rapid ramp up of new technologies, green technologies. It's very focused on ensuring that workers in the fossil fuel sector aren't left behind, but that their skills are deployed where we need them in green, renewable energy, and in a massive overhaul of our transportation system to be green, renewable electricity to be much more accessible, much more convenient, and have a reach that a modern industrialized country should have. We sure need better transit here, but our plan is for the whole country. The other reason I'm really proud of our plan is that we exactly answer the question, how are you going to afford it? We found new sources of revenue. Oh, I thought this was a 90-second question. Oh, I'm sorry. I was timing myself wrong. We just got a passing grade from Kevin Page, so you can look up. We have a budget that works.
Thank you.
So I do disagree with my Conservative colleague, Mr. Bush. The price on pollution does work. The other half of that, though, is sending a clear signal to Canadian businesses by cutting taxes in half for any company producing zero emissions technology. That way, innovators in our society pay for the technology that we need. They're incentivized to do it. I believe that is the how, and then we're not financing it with tax dollars.
Oh, this is a nice one. How, if you do, support youth activists' involvement in government environment's future action plan? So how would you support youth in getting involved in government and the environment's action plans? And I think it makes sense to just keep going up and down the line, doesn't it? 45 seconds on the clock. How do you intend to involve youth and engage youth in the government's action plans regarding climate and environment?
Well, the best way for me was to attend the Global Youth Climate Strike as someone who is running in this election, and any politician, any party that didn't attend is clearly not going to reach out to youth to help them be part of the solution in solving the climate crisis.
Again, 45?
Sorry about that. We are funding an environmental youth corps. We think it's very important to give young people job experience, particularly working at municipal order of government on environmental projects. We also believe we have to respect and listen to the young people. There is no question that one of the best interpreters of science on the planet today is a 16-year-old girl from Stockholm. Greta Thunberg isn't hysterical. She isn't wrong. She understands the science. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report of October 8th, 2018 made it clear. The difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius is a step towards unlivable danger. We have to try to hold to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And with all due respect to the Liberals, you can't get to carbon neutrality in 2050 with Harper's target to 2030.
Thank you. Do you want the question again?
Yes, I do, please.
How would you support youth activists' involvement in government in the environment's future action plans? In the government's environmental future action plans?
Well, I think we saw an example last night when we attended an all-candidate meeting that was hosted by Stelly's secondary students. They organized it, they posed many of the questions, and one of the themes that came up is that we need to do more to engage our youth in civics, in being involved at that level. And I think probably the most constructive venue for that to occur is for us as elected officials to make it a point to create maybe civics clubs at our local schools and encourage them to make submissions to us on a regular basis and inform them. Have a newsletter that's not only tailored specifically to our constituents in general, but specifically targeted to our youth on issues that matter to them and invite feedback from them. Can I get a smile now that I ended on time? No? Okay.
This issue is essentially why I'm running. I also told you I'm a dance artist, and I spend a lot of time working with high school students and teaching them dance and political science together at the same time. I really believe...
Dance and political science?
Yeah, exploring diversity and power through movement.
Okay. Sometimes politics is a song and dance. Thank you.
Diversity and power are not a song and dance like that, no. Not like that. I am very impressed by how intelligent the youth are these days and how much they are doing to help us understand how much this means to them. And so I want to be a voice for them. Our party will lower the voting age to 16. That will help create civics. The Green Party will too, yes. We believe that their leadership is what the future is all about.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more that the leadership of the future is going to be coming from the students of today. And I think we've been seeing great examples by some outstanding individuals stepping up on the world stage, as well as some outstanding individuals on the local stage. Again, to go back to the debate from last night that was put on by the students at Stellies. And those are the things that we need to encourage, we need to participate, and we need to support the students in their activities as they move these forward. But above all, we also need to stop and listen to what they're saying and respond to them as if they were adults, so clearly and articulately, and certainly for the love of God, we should not be ignoring them.
Okay, we're going to go into a different place here and talk about investments. What role does the federal government have in legislating environmental responsibility for pension funds and divesting from the fossil fuel industry? And so whoever wants to start.
On that front, this answer is probably not going to appease many people, but I don't think the federal government should be telling people where they should or should not be investing their money.
This is about the federal government's money in pension funds.
Yeah, at the end of the day, these are the civil servants' pensions funds, and we need to make sure that it is there for them. Now, one of the things the Conservative Party is looking to do, because a lot of the greener technology stocks and funds don't give the same yields, for example, as unfortunately oil and gas, we'll be looking to decrease the taxation rate to a flat 5% on any profits earned from stocks, green stocks or green technology funds, to encourage more people to invest into them. But at the end of the day, this is one spot where I'm going to say the autonomy has to override and the government's got to let people decide for themselves where they should be investing.
The New Democrats are committed to ending fossil fuel subsidies right away on day one. It's one of the first things we're going to do. It's partly how we're going to cost out our budget and our plan to help people, our New Deal for people. So ending fossil fuel subsidies is one of the first things we're going to do. And what was
And the question is, what role does the federal government have in legislating environmental responsibility for pension funds and divesting from the fossil fuel industry?
So so in terms of pensions, that we will immediately make sure that pensions for either private or public entities are protected in law, so that if any company goes bankrupt, they have to pay their pensions before they pay other debts that they have. That has not happened in Canada. And
okay, not quite the question, but almost. Around the investments for those pension funds. Yeah.
Alistair McGregor is making an on that to make sure our pensions are being divested from fossil fuels.
Thank you.
Well, our pensions are for the security of our older citizens and also our federal employees. They're administered independently by civil servants that are qualified to make sound investments so that their pensions are actually there when they need them. And I don't think, I'll agree with my Conservative colleague, it's not for government to interfere and make decisions on behalf of pension holders or future pension recipients on where their money should or shouldn't be invested. If the trend is going in business the way it is, pretty soon oil and gas stocks aren't going to be profitable anyway if we're going to move totally away from it. And the market will naturally take investments away from that field. So the government shouldn't interfere. It should let the market do itself.
Of course, we want to encourage divestment by universities, by any pension holders, but the question related to the Canada Pension Plan may shock some of you. It's not civil servants, it's actually an independent investment board created for Canada Pension Plan. A number of non-Canadians sit on it who are expert money managers. Expert money managers aren't looking through an ethical lens. Our Canadian pension plans are now being put into risky investments with a better chance of a good return, which means a lot of our money is invested in projects in the United States. Recently, we almost invested in private prisons in the United States as a way of making more money for our pensions in retirement. We are heavily invested in fossil fuels. We shouldn't be. One of the great investments of the Independent Pension Board is that we're all invested in pet value. If the pet value chain in the U.S. does well, we all do well. This is not where our pension funds should be. We should divest government pensions from fossil fuels.
I appreciate Ms. May's impassioned quoting of certain companies held by CPP. Honestly, I have no idea how much of the Canadian pension plan these companies represent. It could be a very small share. I think the best approach when you're dealing with a fund like the CPP is to listen to all Canadians, to better understand the issue, to understand the size of those investments, and to work collaboratively with Canadians towards a better outcome for the Canada Pension Plan. A simplistic answer on this one is not going to cut it, I don't think.
It's a good reminder to all of us anyway to check our investments and make sure whether we're investing in future. I'm going to go to, picking up on what Sabina said, I'm going to ask each of you, what are 3 environmental actions your government or you will support in the first 100 days of governance? So I'm wanting to get a better sense of your priorities. What are 3 environmental actions your government or you will support in the first 100 days of governance? 3 environmental actions. Yeah, would you like to go?
Sure.
Okay.
Now, I know it's not exactly likely, but there is always the possibility that I'll be Prime Minister and this will be my government and we'll be moving very fast. So the first step is going to be an educational one. I want to make sure Parliament sits and listens to scientists and every MP gets to ask every question that's on their mind. I want to set up a war cabinet within the main cabinet so that we do nothing but work by consensus to deliver on 60% reductions against 2005 levels by 2030. Quick and easy. Cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Don't waste $13 billion. Ban fracking immediately. Divest the Canada Pension Plan from fossil fuels and move constructively to have a plan for workers within the first 100 days.
Who's up? So the question again, what are 3 environmental actions your government or you will support in the first 100 days of governance, should you be elected?
Well, I'd like to restore the level of funding to Environment Canada and Parks Canada so that we have more science, valid science information that we can act on. And personally, I'd have to educate myself a lot on what the current state of what is being done in government, because I don't have really a depth of knowledge more than the average person sitting here of what's reported to us in the sound bites on the news or a headline in the newspaper. So I would endeavor to educate myself fully on what is in the hopper, both at Environment Canada, Parks Canada, and at the National Research Centre.
Thank you.
Our plan is essentially all surrounded around this, but in the first day of government, we will end oil and gas subsidies. We will institute the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and we will begin to make investments in creating zero-emission vehicles for all of us to be able to get around in zero-emission transit, rapid light rail, all built in Canada, and we want to do that right away.
Amongst other things, we'll be looking to bring in back the home renovation tax credit for any homeowners who are looking to upgrade their homes and make it more carbon neutral by putting in heat pumps or any other energy efficient methods. We're also going to be bringing back the bus pass tax credit that was discontinued by the current government to make it a little bit cheaper to encourage more people to be using public transit. So if you wind up getting a monthly or yearly bus pass, you'll be able to claim that back on your tax returns. Also, we'll be moving ahead with our regulatory reforms so that any emitter over 40 kilotons is immediately going to be caught. And we'll be making sure that there's no loopholes or any special discounts for the large emitters such as cement plants. Everybody over 40 kilotons will be affected, and we'll have to start taking steps immediately to either pay into the fund for research or to lower their emissions the very next year.
Over to Ryan.
Thanks. So 3 environmental initiatives. 1, create the retrofit economy immediately so that Canadians can start getting to work on retrofitting their own homes. 2, starting the phase out of open net pen fish farms. That's critical. And number 3, introducing, and I hope people in this room like it because I saw a lot of Nissan Leafs and I assume some of them came through motorized, a up to $2,000 tax credit for used electric vehicles.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. And the question I'm going to choose, because one of them is only relating to one party, so I'm going to choose a question that relates to everybody. Given the ability of companies to overturn decisions made in the House of Commons, example through NAFTA, how do you plan to fulfill promises of local Canadian green jobs? Can I see who asked this question? Are you willing to identify yourself? A version of it. Can you just give us a little bit more on that? Okay. So I'm going to read the question again. Given the ability of companies to overturn decisions made in the House of Commons, example through NAFTA, how do you plan to fulfill promises of local Canadian green jobs?
I'll go first.
Okay. Okay, so given trade deals, how are you going to make sure to work across borders to reduce greenhouse gases? Would be another version of it?
So Elizabeth may be able to offer some other guidance on this because I know she meets with trade representatives, a slight advantage that incumbents have, I acknowledge. But under the new NAFTA or CUSMA agreement, Chapter 11 is gone, so the investor state and the ability to challenge goes away as soon as we sign that. So I think that will have a meaningful impact on removing the ability of Canadian companies.
It is true.
It is true. Yeah.
And can you just explain on that a little bit more?
We've not signed the new Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement yet, but Chapter 11, which allows the challenges to occur, is being removed. So. Yeah, but that's what allows foreign companies to challenge Canadian laws. That will be removed once Canada actually. I'm not sure I understand that part of it.
Clarify.
Yeah, I want to jump in on this one because we don't know if the new NAFTA CUSMA will be ratified. There are other things about it I don't like at all in terms of pharmaceutical prices and chipping away at supply management. I worked really hard in the pressuring to get rid of Chapter 11, but the reality is those investor state provisions are now also in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. They're still in the CETA with Europe, so we have other issues with investor state provisions. Here's the thing. Ever since the early 1990s, while we were busy negotiating a climate agreement, the World Trade Organization was being set up, and it had the effect of a chilling effect that stopped us from being able to use in international environmental treaties trade sanctions, which are a very effective enforcement mechanism. So we're proposing in our platform to renegotiate the World Trade Organization to a World Trade and Climate Organization that will ensure that environmental treaties I'm sorry, the red thing.
Well, maybe let's let her finish her sentence.
Okay, thank you. If we can, and I just want to go back to Article 20 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which is the foundational negotiated treaty that got to the World Trade Organization. Back in GATT, in Article 20, it said that no trade deal could prevent a country from defending its natural regions, its conservation purposes, which obviously includes climate. So we need to push the World Trade Organization from its Uruguay round position of challenging environmental treaties to saying the job of the World Trade Organization, renamed the World Trade and Climate Organization, is to ensure that climate treaties are met because they become enforceable with trade sanctions.
Thank you. Does anyone need the question again or other comments on that?
Yeah, I'd kind of like to have that question again. I wasn't
Okay.
really clear with it the first round.
So again, given the ability of companies to overturn decisions made in the House of Commons through NAFTA, example through NAFTA, how do you plan to fulfill promises of local Canadian green jobs? So I think we're talking about trade and protecting green jobs and being able to transition.
Okay, well, I think we've heard that that particular issue that was used as an example has already been addressed, assuming we do, in fact, ratify the new agreement. But I think it serves as a cautionary note in negotiating further deals in the future. The fact is we are in a global economy. We do rely on international trade. It's important for us because we're a net exporter of goods. But it's important when we negotiate these deals that we protect our sovereignty above all. Again, that's some of the dangers that are hidden in some of the UN agreements. They start with a preamble that they're non-binding, but if you get further into them, they become binding through adoption of certain policies or ratification. We really need to be careful moving forward that we protect our sovereignty as a nation.
Thank you.
I think this issue is why it's important to realize that the crisis that we're facing is a global crisis and that we need these institutions to work with us. I agree that having the World Trade Organization reformed to include climate would be good, but also if you get a chance to do that, then please re-look at how those institutions work. For instance, the World Trade Organization is supposed to be one nation, one vote, ends up being that the most powerful nations have the most say. And we need to not do that, because anywhere that this happens, if they're throwing plastics in the streets in Nigeria, we know it will affect us. So we need to work together, and we need the whole globe to be able to do this together.
Thank you.
I think most of this has already been covered quite effectively. One of the big things, again, as Ron had mentioned, is we do need to be careful. And this is when we're going to make trade deals, we want to make sure we make trade deals with other countries that respect the rule of law, because if they're playing with a different set of rule books from ours, we cannot win in those trade deals. So it's very important going forwards. I'd also echo again with what Elizabeth May has said, although again, I'll defer to her on the names because I'm not really one to care about what something's actually called. I go for the substance, and is it going to work?
Okay. We're going to go quickly, but give you each a minute to have a closing statement and a message for your voters here. And so I'm going to not do this. Somehow, I can't train my brain. Oh, am I? What am I doing? Can't look. You just got to pick a bee. Oh, wow. Ron, you've got the first word. 1 minute.
Excuse me?
Yeah?
Can you make sure that all candidates have equal time?
I will.
And not have some who have to allow to speak over time?
I will do my very best. Thank you.
How much time do I have?
You have 1 minute. Closing
All right.
remarks.
All right. Well, it's been a great privilege to be here tonight and share with you and also learn a lot. My message to you is that you have an important decision to make in about 18 days. So I urge you all to do your homework and go home and research everything you've heard tonight and see who's telling you the truth. Honestly, questions are the answers. And the reality is that you can have absolutely anything you want, so long as you have both the ability and willingness to pay the price. How or what is being presented to you going to be paid for? Ask those questions, because there's been a lot of promises made that I don't believe are possible to be delivered.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here. Thank you for being interested in the election coming up, in Canada's 43rd election. Thank you for making sure that you're informed voters and that you take the time to learn about all the parties and all the things we're offering. Like them, our new deal for people is up online, and please, you're welcome to read it. It is costed, and it will give you many things as people back in your pockets. And so I think it's a plan that works for people and for the environment. I just want to take the minute to say, please also read this wonderful book by Jagmeet Singh, our leader. He explains in here what it is that Chardi Kala means to Sikh people. I am one of them. Sikh people have a phrase called Chardi Kala. It means that when things are tough, when things are really hard for us, we all together can have rising spirits. Chardi Kala means rising spirits, and I wish that to all of you. We can do this together.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I hope you found it both informative and at least a little bit entertaining. Judging from your applause and that not many people walked out, I think we did a good job up here, so thank you to my fellow candidates as well. For me, again, I'm running because of my two kids. I'm not happy with the way the country is going. From the economy, with the massive debts, the environment, and especially the health care. These are all things that we care deeply about, and we want to make sure they're there for us now, and they're there for our children in the future, because we're only here for a little while, but they're going to have to deal with the consequences of our actions much longer. So you guys have a hard job to do, and I ask you to come and talk to myself, talk to Ryan, talk to Ron, because all of us wound up abstaining on several of those questions early on today. And there's a reason for that, because those are complicated issues on many of them that don't well generate into a yes or no answer. So please keep asking and keep finding out the information you want so that you can be comfortable that you're making the right choice on October 21st. And I hope you will vote for me, David Bush. Have a good night.
Thank you.
So thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks to Ms. May. Thanks to Mr. Broda, Ms. Singh, Mr. Bush. Thanks to all of you who came here. It has been a privilege to participate up to this point in this election. I look forward to the final, I think it's 18 days now, before General Voting Day. Of course, you have the opportunity, if you're sparing a turkey this year, or if you happen to be vegetarian and you don't really celebrate Thanksgiving, to go and vote early from October the 11th to 14th. I am working to earn your vote because it matters how we bring Canadians forward, how we invest in our community, how we get people to point A to point B on buses. We're making investments in public transit like new electric buses here in Greater Victoria. You've heard many of the other commitments that we have made. I am out there to work for you. That's always been my role as a local elected official. I'm now seeking to earn your vote as Member of Parliament here in Saanich-Gulf Islands on October 21st as the Liberal candidate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as a closing statement, I can only say what a great thing it is that civil society took on the initiative to create 100 debates across Canada tonight for the environment. It was a week ago, coming up tomorrow, that I walked with 500,000 people in Montreal. There were was close to 1 million people when you count 100,000 in Vancouver, walking across Canada, calling for climate action, coming from the voices of our kids in the school strikes. We have an obligation to do much more than incremental half measures. Most political parties, to my great sadness, over more than 30 years I've been working on this issue, are prepared to do the very minimum necessary to be politically viable. They're timid. They're cowards. We need courage. We need hope. We need to do what needs to be done, no matter how difficult it might be.
Our plan is mission possible. It's not mission easy. Please help us.
Well, we've reached the end, and I want to thank you all for working together and keeping a good atmosphere of camaraderie and sticking to the issues. And I want to thank you all for staying engaged and, being responsive. You have an important job. Tell your friends as well. Remind everyone, let's all get out and vote. Make a decision. Let's move forward with action. I also want to make sure that we thank the organizing committee. So Jack, can you just help me with that? And do you have a microphone for Jack? There you go. Speak into it like a rock star.
Thank you very much for all of your attendance tonight, and I just wanted to say a couple words of special thanks to our superb moderator, Anne-Marie Daniel. To my co-lead in this particular debate amongst the four on the lower island, Janet Silman. To our very good timekeepers, Robin Quaintance and Ellen Graham. To our host, St. Paul's United, and their minister, Reverend Susanna Bates, and board chair, Fiona St. Clair. Our excellent tech person, Teresa Tate, in the back, keeping the sound going. And the video feed artist, Adam Blaney, in the back. And other volunteers, Judy Gaylord and Sonia Ignatieff. And, sorry? And of course to Miss Tiffany Joseph for starting us off with the Indigenous welcome. One person who's not here but who was instrumental in all of this is Steve Gray from Machosen, who's working on all of the 4 Lower Island debates and has done a superb job in keeping us integrated and organized so that we would present 4 common questions and some suggested questions for kind of the short snappers and that you heard of the forced choice. And so to Steve, wherever you are tonight, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Jack. Okay, drive safe, get out and vote. Let's make this world good. Thank you.